All right, guys, I'm going to explain compression using the Fruity limiter. So let me show you what I've got going on in this project. I've got a sample here that I recorded. This sample has some really quiet parts and some really loud parts. So it has a very large dynamic range. And this is perfect because this is really ideally something that you would want to compress. So what have I got here? I've got compression demo this sample on mixer insert 2, and I have 2 limiters. Both of these limiters should just be default. There shouldn't be anything here. Sorry, let me get this out of the way. Okay, so let me just make sure that these are default and default. Okay, so you might ask, why do I have 2? And I'll get to that shortly. But first, let me just play this sample again and just look down here in the limiter windows. You should see the data coming through as you would expect. Okay, so nothing's happening right now. Neither of these limiters have any settings activated. It's just totally default. No compression is occurring. So let's actually dive into what compression is. Compression is the reducing of the dynamic range of a sound. So what is dynamic range? Dynamic range is the difference between the lowest low and the highest high of a sound. So in our case, this really low transient down here and the really high transient up here. The dynamic range is the difference between these 2 points. And compression is the act of reducing or compressing that difference in dynamic range. So down here in the limiters, why I have 2 of them is because I think it's really, it just helps a lot to have 2 here, because what you can do is on the left, you can turn off output peaks, and on the right, you can turn off input peaks. So then you kind of have this in, out, before, after kind of view here, and it's really nice. I'm only going to be applying the actual compression settings to the left side, which is the first limiter in the effect chain on the mixer. On the right, I'm just going to use this as a visual aid. That's all it's going to be. I'm not going to touch any of the settings on it. It's just going to sit here and show me the output. That's all it's going to do. So let's play this again, and you can see the purple input and the green output, which currently are going to be the exact same because we haven't done anything yet. All right, so hopefully I haven't lost you yet. Let's actually get into compression here. So I'm going to go down here in the limiter. These are called Fruity limiters, but they actually have a compressor in them as well. All you have to do is click this little comp right here, and you can get the compression settings. You don't need to worry about what the limiter might be doing or what the compressor might be doing. They're just kind of both active all the time based on the levels that you set. So I'm going to leave the limiter totally as is. It just has this default ceiling. So I'll reset that, and I'm just going to come down here to the compressor and start playing around with the compressor. So the first 2 knobs, the most important ones in the compressor I want to talk about is threshold and ratio. So threshold, as I'm dragging it around right now, threshold is basically the line you set, and everything that passes above that line, any audio that passes above this line is going to be compressed. So let's set this somewhere right in the middle of our data here. I'll say negative 15 dB to start. Everything above this line is going to be compressed at a ratio, the next knob, at a ratio of, we'll start with 2 to 1. So to summarize, everything that passes above this line of negative 14 or negative 15 dB, every piece of audio that makes it above that line is going to be compressed at a ratio of 2 to 1. And by compressed, all I mean by that is the volume is going to be reduced. That's all compression is. It's just volume reduction. So what next? Now that we've kind of set a threshold randomly, pretty much, and a ratio randomly, that's fine for now because you can hear and see the impact these parameters have as we continue. I'll talk about attack and release. So attack and release are pretty standard. They do what you would expect them to do if you're familiar, with using knobs like this in synths or really anything else. The attack is how long it takes the compression to actually fully fire. So this is measured in milliseconds, and I'll leave this at 2 ms for now. That sounds fine. Again, we can just play with all these knobs to get the settings that we want. I'm just going to kind of set some arbitrary values for now so we can start to see this in the limiter windows. Release is the opposite of attack. It's how long it takes the compression to disengage. Once compression fires based on one of these transients that passes above the threshold, The release is how long in milliseconds it takes the compression to disengage. How long it takes the audio to return to normal, for compression to stop. That's all that is. And by default, I think it's somewhere right around there. Yeah. By default, it's 250 ms, and I'm going to leave it right there. Okay, so when I play this again, you are going to notice a slight difference now over on the right on the output limiter because of the settings that we just set up. We set a threshold, we set a ratio, we set an attack, and we set a release. So now we're actually going to have some compression going on, and you're going to see that compression up here on this white line. So I suspect that only the very last part of this sample where it's really, really loud, I suspect that's the only place we're going to actually see compression. And you'll see it on the left coming down as kind of these white lines mirroring the transient peaks here in the input data. So let's take a listen and look to see what's happening. Okay, so it's pretty much right here. At the end is the only part that the compression is actually firing. This is your visual cue that compression is occurring. That sound towards the end is the volume is being reduced based on the ratio that we set because of how much data is passing above our threshold. So we have data passing above our threshold at other points in the sound as well, but the ratio isn't strong enough to actually apply compression to that. It doesn't need to. There's no need for the compressor to actually work that hard yet based on the settings that we have. So let me increase our threshold because we pretty much found out that that's not aggressive enough. We need a lower threshold and probably a higher ratio to actually squash this sound and even it up, because it's still very different in its volume. Like, we still have this really low peak down here and this really high peak over here. So let's drop this threshold. Let's get real aggressive right away. We'll go down to negative 30 dB. That I suspect should be enough, and we'll bump the ratio up. We'll just double it. We'll go over to 4 here. So we're going to be cutting down the loudness of everything that goes above negative 30 dB by a ratio of 4 to 1. So let's play this again, and now we should see compression firing all throughout the sample. And over on the right, rather than seeing what we're familiar with, rather than having this output kind of represent our original waveform, you're going to see it's much more uniform. It's going to be kind of squashed down. It's going to be much quieter, but it's going to be a lot more uniform. All right, so we're making good progress. This right here, this is officially compressed. We have just applied compression to the sample. That's really all it is. We've reduced the volume of the high peaks. We've kind of squashed the sound together. Now the only thing left to do is add makeup gain. So now that we've kind of tidied up the sound and made it much more even, we want to use this gain knob to boost the gain of this. So once we boost the gain, this kind of this level over here, this kind of straight playing field we have, should remain the same. We're just applying volume to the entire thing. So let's do that. Let's apply 8 dBs of gain to this, and we'll see this kind of rise up. And listen with your ears as well. Don't just look at the limiter. Listen to how different this was when we started. Okay, look over here on the left. This is what we started with, all this purple data, and then on the right, this is our result after compression. See the difference? See how different the dynamic range is here? We have a large dynamic range on the left, and we have a very small dynamic range on the right. Now let's talk about release. So release here, it's nice because the end of the note is easy to explain release. So right here, where compression is kind of ending, this right where my cursor is, this is kind of the last bit of compression that fires. This is the last, obviously no in the sample, but this is the last piece of transient data that kind of comes above our threshold right here. So this is where the compression starts to roll off. So this is a pretty normal roll off for compression, but if I jack the release all the way up, you'll see that instead of this kind of sharp decline here, it's going to be much more gradual. It's going to take a lot longer for the compression to kind of disengage. So let's play this again, and you'll see it very, very visibly here in the analysis and gain envelope line. So see how different that line is than the one we had before? That's what the release is actually doing. The compressor is still firing all the way through here rather than kind of going back to normal right away. That's what the release is doing. The attack is in a way doing the opposite, but I'll let you play around with that. Kind of turn that back to where we had it. So there are other settings in the limiter as well. Compression is a huge topic. You know, I could go on for hours about this, but I won't. There's a saturation knob here, a knee knob. There's a curve setting. There's a head knob here, part of the envelope, and there's actually a noise gate in the limiter too, which is nice. But I'm not going to get into those right now. The gain, the threshold, the ratio, the attack, and the release are really what you guys need to get going on compression if you're not doing it right now. There's no reason to be scared of compression at all. It's this simple. We've done it right here. We can hear it. We can see it. This is all you really need to know to kind of get moving on this stuff. And the only thing I'll explain before I close the video here is what the limiter is. So it's called Fruity Limiter. So I know it seems like we should actually talk about what the limiter is. So the limiter is just a very intense form of compression. If you click between the limiter and the compressor, you'll see that they're almost the same thing. They are very similar in the settings that they have. It's just really the difference of, instead of having a threshold on the limiter, we have a ceiling and there's no ratio. And the reason for that is a ceiling is just that. It's a ceiling. It's basically a threshold with an infinity to 1 ratio. It doesn't matter what the ratio is. In this case, there isn't a knob for it. It doesn't matter what it is because the ceiling says any audio that gets above this line is not going to be processed. It's just going to be totally wiped out. This is what's called a brick wall. So if I lower the ceiling all the way down here, you're going to notice on the right that nothing's ever going to get above the ceiling. It's just going to be a brick wall right here at this line. So that's not good. We obviously don't want to do something like that because we lose so much of what makes the sound the sound.